Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praises to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Ha, Rakakwadash, Mama. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone and the elders. Double honors to my apostle and elder as well, Ahurwan Ban Yasha Allah of the Lions Den Camp. And salutation to the fellow Akim, Awakim, and children, Banyam, that believe in truth and sincerity. It's your brother Athanya Allah back to you another lesson. And Yahweh Ratazah is edifying. And as you can see, the blasphemy, all right, on the screen, you got scoffers, in these different groups and even in person when we out there teaching, you got people that just, they rather gainsay than go and study and do research on their own, on themselves, rather than giving the sacrifice of fools. Or they just so used to what they've been taught, that dogma, to where they stuck on their beliefs, all right, or their butt hurt because they're heathen. All right, or they have a mama heathen, or, their mama heathen or something like that, or their girl a heathen, or a possible heathen, all right, because again, it's not according to color, all right, but they declare themselves as being a certain denomination of nationality, by way of their father, or their upbringing, whatever the case may be. They find out, they come across that term Gentile, and we put it in perspective for them as far as the Israelite foreigners of what Paul, being an apostle of the Gentiles, apostle meaning sent out, he was sent out to the Israelite foreigners, Furthermore, it was stamped, as the Lord woke up Paul, as he told him it was hard to kick up against the pricks, and sent them out, made him an apostle of the Gentiles, man, the Israelite foreigners, not the Gentiles as in Israel. The other nations, all right? So you got two forms of Gentiles. You got the Gentiles in a heathen nation, all right, or somebody from another heathen nation, or the true term, which Paul used it a lot in the context as far as the Israelite foreigners who he was sent out to, who his apostleship was steered towards, all right, which was furthermore stamped when Yahweh Shai came on the scene, all right, holding the menorah, representing the 7 churches of Asia Minor. All right. So as you can see, it says Paul was not a Hebrew Israelite, and neither are you. It just doesn't make sense. One of the first scriptures that came to mind was 2 Corinthians chapter 11. And I'll start at verse 13 just to get a point. And it says, "For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Yahweh Shah Mashiach," right? Christ, we know Christ meaning anointed, Hamashiach meaning anointed in the Hebrew, all right? So Paul's speaking on the false apostles, the false teachers, right? IUIC being the example. Another good prime example would be Sakari in this instance, as Sakari denounced Paul's writings, just like these heathens and 2/3 of our people on these comment boards are scoffing, not having a full understanding of the truth, not hearing the conclusion of the whole matter, all right? Sakari is a prime example. Why? Because they didn't believe in Paul's writings. And then now you look at their doctrine, like that dude, the rapper dude with the tubular and blah, 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 with the deacon, the so-called deacon of Sakari. He was one of the ones now pushing that notion, and the other dude, the other little cranny Arabic looking guy, which he could be an Israelite, he just look Arabic. This other skinny one, Hassad or whatever. Damn, I think that's his name, Assad or something like that. Whatever, man. Salakia. They trying to graft the heathens in, man. Talking about Gentiles can make it and all that. So it's like, damn, y'all been teaching this truth this whole time, And so you got people in their congregations that don't even believe that, and then you got some that do, and that's why they entered into those congregations, because they pacified false doctrine. But it says here back in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 14, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light, right? Don't marvel, because they come in and they turn and twist the scriptures, man. Sakari, Guerrilla Hebrew, real profound, or look to seem to be real profound on the scriptures. but they were full of access, extortion, robbery, right? Pertaining to the flock, the people of the Lord, man, stripping them naked. You know, when they supposed to be comforting them with the truth, you know, they sewing pillows of false doctrine, man, pertaining to Ezekiel chapter 13. All right, that doctrine that ain't gonna stick. So they was in it for what? 50 lucre sake, selling breakdowns, selling, you know, and they be the main congregations with the biggest following on their pages, on their videos. That's how they can, you know, create that evil thought of, oh, let me sell this breakdown. Because 10 people, they can sell it for $50. 10 people, that's $500. Like, you know, they think like that. They still think like nigga, right? But it's back in itself and say, you know, hey, Satan transformed to an angel of light. So, like the scriptures say, man, you know, through thy good wisdom, thou hast gotten treasures, you know, through the Lord's wisdom. So the wicked use the Lord's wisdom and manipulate it and maneuver through this society. But you see that when they go through this society, you know, they want to be amongst the top hats, you know, the small hats. You know, call them top hats. They want to be amongst the small hats and rub shoulders and show the information that they know, so they can be like, ooh, shh. You know, it's more of a thrill, entertainment to them versus about salvation. That's why they don't go through the affliction, the streets. But it's back in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 15. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness. Right, he got minions too. Right? The wheat and the tares, man. That's why the Lord say, let them grow together. He know the who's. And that's what it's coming down to, man. The who's. You know. Whose end shall be according to their works, right? I say again, let no man think me a fool. If otherwise, yet as a fool receive me, that I may boast myself a little, right? And this Paul just speaking of, you know, hey, they boast. I don't boast in the flesh, but I'm gonna have to stand my ground to show you my lot, my anointed, through the spirit of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. All right. I say again, let no man think me a fool. This is back in verse 16 from the top. If otherwise, yet as a fool receive me, that I may boast myself a little. That which I speak it not after the Lord, right? He said he don't speak it after the Lord, because this is not nothing the Lord would say. You know, he wouldn't want me to say this, but I'm gonna say it so you can understand what he would want you to understand from me. All right, so don't take the delivery, but understand what's being said, so to speak. All right. So this back in verse 17, that which I speak it not after the Lord, but as it were foolishly in this confidence of boasting, right? Seeing that many glory after the flesh, I will glory also, right? And that's, you know, it's hard to be humble, because, hey, when you're in this truth, especially amongst this wicked society and 2/3 of our people, the heathen, all right, we're the majority, all right, because there's more of us than there's more of them, all right, but it seems in the flesh that we're the minority, all right, to where they'll boast against you, all right, with all type of wrongs and misinformation, but because they're loud, they're wrong, they're right, so to speak, you know. So it's like being humble, being of a contrite spirit. They take that as a weakness in this society, you know, even much more than the times of Paul back then. So they take that even much more in the times now. You know, they look at your humbleness as a weakness, like they can run over you. And then when you stand your ground, they look at it like you snap. When all actuality, you use proper words and you were professional about it. Didn't even get loud. But the way you put it in perspective and articulated yourself, it put fear in them, because it's the spirit of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, man. You know, they want you to rather lash out and be weak as they deal in the carnal, in the flesh sense. All right, but we have to deal in a higher vibration, right? So again, like the wicked be having the most confidence is the point. So Paul, is just boasting a little bit. He's still acknowledging and what it say, rejoice with fear and trembling, right? That's the respect and the fear of the Lord that the elect have, to where you could be the biggest one in the room from a physical standpoint, but in heart and in flesh, but you're a gentle giant, so to speak, man. Your righteousness, you wouldn't put harm or hurt a fly, but everybody look at you like such. All right, I'm sure a person like Paul went through that. Okay, but it's back in the scriptures again. Just get back on topic. Verse 18, seeing that many glory after the flesh, I will glory also. For ye suffer fools gladly, seeing ye yourselves are wise. For ye suffer if a man bring you into bondage, if a man devour you, if a man take of you, if a man exalt himself, if a man smite you on the face, right? I speak as concerning reproach, as though we had been weak. Howbeit, wherein soever any is bold, I speak foolishly, I am bold also. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I, right? And Paul not boasting like, oh yeah, I ain't born Israelite, but I'm gonna get grafted in that olive tree like the heathen do today. Nah, you can't. If you wasn't a part of the olive tree, you can't get grafted back into the olive tree. You're a part of a different vine. The Lord is about purity. There's no gene splicing and mixing and mingling. Lord about separation. Right? So this Paul again, acknowledging he's a Hebrew, and not through faith. Like how they would say, even though it is through faith. All right. But they like to just work off, yeah, I'm a Hebrew through faith. Like, I believe. Nah, it's more than just belief. It is a lineage behind it. And it goes from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. All right. So it says here back in verse 22, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? Right. And to be, a part of Israel, all right, you have to be once a part of Jacob, because Israel, his former name was Jacob. All right. So the lineage goes back from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. All right. And that's what ultimately Jacob wrestled with an angel and changed his name to Israel and begot 12 sons, which ultimately is the progenitor of the 12 tribes of Israel. All right. And Paul is from one of them. He's from one of those stock, one of those nations that amount up to one united front, one united nation of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, his peculiar treasure. So it says, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Right. So it's Abraham to Isaac, to Jacob, who later changed his name to Israel, which will make you an Israelite if you're from any one of his son's tribes. Right. So this back at 23. Are they ministers of Christ? Meaning Hamashiach, right? I speak as a fool. I am more, right? Because the foundation had their job. And Paul was sent out to the Israelite foreigners, man, which was scattered amongst the heathen nations, living amongst their customs, thinking that they're the other nations. Think of his duty, having to put that in perspective, that they're not what they thought they were. Like how we do today. It's even more of a evangelism. I'm not going to say it's more of an evangelism, but it's a heavy duty, just as the foundation of those who were keeping the law, so on and so forth. It says, verse 23, are they ministers of Yahweh Shai Mashiach? I speak as a fool, I am more, in laborers more abundant, in stripes more measured, in prisons more frequent, in deaths oft. Right. And that's why Paul was set up for that ministry, man. The Lord had him go through different course of works for a set of people that was his people, but were dealing with a different set of affliction, a different lot. All right. Verse 24, I just like to read these last couple because how Paul be spitting it. You can tell you, Jake, of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. That sound like a bar. Of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. Right. A night and a day I have been in the deep. God. And journeying often in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, and in perils among false brethren. You know, just going into his lot, man, going through Damascus, doing, you know, as he writing these letters to, you know, the churches of Asia Minor, you know, Corinth, so on and so forth. This is the book of Romans, chapter 11, and verse 1. Just go cut them right here. I say then, have God cast away his people? God forbid. For I also am an Israelite, of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. Right? You see who the who's, man. The Lord say he is also an Israelite, of the seed, man, the sperma, the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. That's Romans 11 and 1. Let's see what that term seed give us. See, a Christian with false doctrine, they scared to do that. Dudes of IUIC, they can't do it. And dudes of the Sakari, they scared to do things like this, look up words and stuff like that, because they scared that it's gonna beg them a different or make them look wrong. But we got the truth. But it says here, sperma.
Strong's G 4690, sperma. Sperma.
Right, deprived from the Greek, as the New Testament was translated from the Greek, from which a plant germinates. Right, a plant. Going back to what, that olive tree, you got to be a part of that vine, that olive tree. You can't be a part of another tree and think you go be grafted into the olive tree like it states in Romans. All right. The seed, i.e. the grain or kernel, which contains within itself the germ of the future plants, right? So in the human form, the seed, the germinating seed, the sperma, which would create in a human form, which would create a person, a human being, right? Has a stock, just like a plant, a grain. It has a certain stock. Everybody else can say where they come from or what nationality is, but the two antagonists, Esau and the protagonist on the earth, man, Jacob. The Israelites, the true Israelites, the true Jews, the so-called Southern Kingdom, you so-called Negroes in the ghettos of society, man. And then what, Levi pertaining to the Haitians today, or the bywords, what Esau would refer to you as a Haitian, and Benjamin, those of the Caribbean islands, Jamaican descent. All right, Paul would be a Jamaican today. The semen, virile, you see the second definition. The product of this semen, seed, children, offspring, progeny, family, tribe. All right? So when you go into the term seed in the scriptures, it goes into the term sperma, meaning lineage is important. Your bloodline, quote unquote, like how Esau, Esau just hear blood and you go crazy. Your bloodline has somewhat to do with this thing pertaining to salvation. All right, pertaining to who your father was, because that's who carries the seed. That's where we go into the law and the different laws, right? The different feasts and like Passover. All right. Every household stems from the man, right? On down. the head, the man, the Lord, the man, on down. And you declare your pedigree after your fathers, roughly paraphrasing. I believe that's in Numbers. And bear with me 1 second, all right? But yeah, I just wanted to get that definition, sperma. In Romans 11 and 1. I wanted to say it was something in Romans 12 I wanted. Because we present our bodies as a living sacrifice, not like IUIC in buildings with 501c3 charters, right? Giving that false doctrine to what people still out here gang saying. But everybody have their job to do. They have their job to do, to be the antagonist, to be a gangsayer, to be a scoffer, to be an unbeliever. And we have our job to be those who believe, man. To be that faith that the Lord go find on the earth. All right. But these even accounts to where Paul had to confound the foundation, like Peter and them, to establish his ministry. To put it in perspective, man. You know, to show that they speaking the same things. They both ushering in Yahweh Shai, and that's similar to the spirit that's out today. But this is Romans 12 and 1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, right? Out there on the highways and byways, man, on the World Wide Web, the unicorn, as we declare a downfall of a sinful kingdom on its soil, on its sinful soil. We public enemy number one due to the Patriot Act, right? Every U.S. citizen is deemed a domestic terrorist after 2001, September 11 event, which ultimately put us in a surveillance state to where we needed to be so we can get closer to the times that we're in now, the end. All right, World War III, this devil setting up garrisons and going into his fourth industrial revolution, his new monetary system, so on and so forth, man. Ultimately to lead to that pressure that's going to bust the pipes to establish that MOTB, all right, that you ought to not take, which is the RFID microchip if you listen and learn. But it says here, I beseech you, back in Romans 12 and 1, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto Yahweh, which is your reasonable service, man. Right, doing what we got to do to the best of our abilities, all right, so we can be found without no guile, without blemish, without major sin, right? So the Lord can deal with us. Verse 2, and be not conformed to this world, right? You got to flee out of this world. Deliver yourself, man, and take none of this place's plagues, because this place plagues has reached up to the heavens, and the Lord is getting ready to put a judgment upon it and those who lavish in this place. All right, so you can't flee this place physically, but you got to flee this place spiritually, mentally. You have to have the understanding of the ordinances of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, man. His way is truth. What he coming to do is salvation. Or you gonna miss his salvation. When it come, you gonna miss it. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and the acceptable and perfect will of God. For I say, though the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, right? Like the Gorilla Hebrew, these dudes who was curating characters with completely false doctrine, or not complete doctrine, man. They didn't study enough. And even after studying enough, it's a continual study to stay sharp. It's a continual sharpening your sword. Well, it just wasn't of the elect. So you're not supposed to think highly, you ought to think. And it's back in verse 3. But to think soberly, according as Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai have dealt to every man the measure of faith, right? Whatever measure of faith you have. You know, what could the toe say to, and vice versa? What could the head say to the toe? But you got people who are real in depth, all right, who again got to the water first, the apostles, Zaquan, and elders who got to the water first, who seasoned in the breakdowns, who seasoned in the truth, all right? Then you got, those who do the exhortations, man, who uplift the brothers, who everybody had their duty, they work in this truth. All right. But those who try to exalt themselves, and like the Guerrilla Hebrews, the Bishop Nathaniels, the IUICs, you see that they always had holes in their doctrine. You don't have to worship Yahweh Shai, or we don't believe and read Paul's writings. What you reading? Oh, that's Hebrews? Oh, no, we don't believe in Paul, right? Like little stuff like that dude was saying is pertaining to Sakari and the Guerrilla Hebrew. That's why he's a myth. This is Romans chapter 12, verse 4. For as we have many members in one body, and all members have not the same office, right? So you have to acknowledge that. Not to sit up here and be a devil's advocate. And it was crazy. They don't know when they be being a devil's advocate, when they be put on the spotlight, and they keep on, teaching blasphemy. So we being many are one body in Christ, and every one members one of another, having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us. Whether prophecy, let us prophecy, according to the proportion of faith, or ministry, let us wait on our ministry, or he that teacheth on teaching, or he that exhorteth on exhortation, right? You got brothers that just got different spirits, right? You see it too. You got brothers that just like, they're motivational. You know what I'm saying? You got brothers that just straight diligent. You hear me? No BSing, you know what I'm saying? Always on they P's and Q's, pertaining to the work. Always on fire, right? Bishop, a good example of this, Camp Kanaksahan, right? Nakar, right? Of diligence, always steadfast in the word and the truth and the work. And you got your exhortation brothers like myself who uplift, boost, faith boosters, right? Teachers. We all teachers to a certain degree, so everybody, eventually you find your niche in the love of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, man, if you truly and sincere. All right, if not, you go be all over the place, or you go reach that pinnacle, ultimately to be brought real low. All right, so you got to eat the whole roll, hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Paul was an Israelite indeed, and not just claiming it to be grafted into the olive tree, but he was of the tribe of Benjamin. All right, through the seed of Abraham, the scriptures say. Shalom, Habadan, DTA. To the next one.